Beloveds, I just wanted to be a little closer to you today. My childhood minister, the Reverend Dr. Forrest Church, famously said that religion is a response to being alive and having to die. And this music we're listening to today is a musical response to being alive, having to die, and having to make meaning of those two. The music and the lyrics span continents and centuries and religions and are sung in 12 different languages. It is the human condition to be alive, recognize we have to die, and trying to make sense of that journey. Now, Unitarians are pretty good at the life part. We celebrate life. And we generally leave open the question of what happens after death. We say it is a great mystery. And hence, why don't we just focus on the life part that we have way more data about? We know about life. And in the middle, it sort of gets stuck. Like, well, if we're going to leave death or what happens after death a mystery, then maybe we don't need to talk that much about the dying process the way other religions do. But today I want to talk about the spiritual work of dying and the spiritual work and gifts of accompanying those who are dying. This day, 14 years ago, I was in a 6-week period where I was accompanying my mother into death. I was a midwife to her process. And a fair amount of this looked like caring for her body as well as her mind and spirit to make sure that she was clean and not thirsty and fed and just comfortable, the way a mother cares for her young child. And she'd say to me, I didn't know, since I was not yet a mother, she didn't know if I had that capacity to take care of someone in that way. But I'll tell you, that time when I was caring for her, she was giving me one of the greatest gifts she did. Now, my mother raised me. Everything good in me is because of my mother. I am so her daughter. But the gifts she gave in dying were particular. She was a light to me. She became a lamp, as the Buddha said. And so I want to share with you the lessons of the spiritual work of dying that she gave me. The first of which is the body leads the way. I think one reason we struggle with death is that we simply cannot understand it. Everything our bodies tells us is to savor this world, to see it, to taste it, to smell it, to hear it, to feel it. How can you let go of something that enchants you this much? But I will tell you, the body starts the process. The body starts to release. Now, I knew this in part because of my mother's love of tennis and her particular love of Roger Federer. So when my mother was in her 60s, she had been single for a while and was thinking that maybe she would want a companion in her life. And being a tennis lover, she thought a bracket system would be the way to go. And I remember we were on a trip, we were taking a ferry boat as part of a road trip south, and she was informing me that Roger Federer had made it to the quarterfinals of her love match. And then she looked and she goes, I don't know that he's going to the semis though. But let me just say how much she loved Roger Federer. So she loved him so much, intense so much, that she would go to like the US Open, and she would get there for like the early matches. It spans like 2 weeks. And she would not just watch like the early matches, she would watch the practice warm-up rounds. And that was the way to get close to the tennis stars. And so people would gather, and there'd be like a tennis court and people and a chain link fence between them. And a lot of fans would gather. And there was one day, and again, my mother was in her 60s, and she was a petite thing, and she bent down on all fours, crawled through the people's legs, and popped herself up right in front of the fence and stuck her little tennis ball there right in front of Roger, and he signed it. And as part of that, their fingers touched. And when she would tell this story, she'd go, ah. So when my mother was in her last weeks and in the deathbed that she never got out of, I would tell her, Mom, the French Open is going on. It's Roger versus Federer, like right now. And she'd say, stop. That is not where I'm headed. You don't bring anything into this room that does not support my process. When you're dying, your whole world narrows to the work ahead of you. So the second lesson I learned is how much spiritual work is involved in dying. She didn't want to hear about Roger or tennis or any of the things going on in my life or her family's lives. The conversations she wanted to have were largely spiritual, and she would have them with anyone who was open to it. And I'll tell you, she talked about God and spirit and curiosity in a way that I never heard her whole life. And she prayed a lot, and she was not someone who prayed. But it wasn't the words or the form or the posture. It was the peace that accompanied the prayer that was so powerful. Third thing I learned from her is, as solemn as that is, there can be joy as well. When you're dying, you go through a process called life review, where you review all the meaningful moments in your life. And my mom had often done this with me to impart valuable lessons, but this life review was just for her. She often went back to the moments of delight. And I remember learning about some boyfriend I never knew existed who took her to a prom when she was 16. And the song that they danced to, and she played the music, and how tall he was, and what it felt to be held, and she wrapped her arms around herself, and she swayed to the music, and I swear I saw my mother as she looked at 16. Such joy. So in my first congregation, when there was this congregant, Fran was born. She was older than me, but she died in her 50s, which was probably because when she was born, she was under 4 pounds, and medicine wasn't where it is now. And so her lungs never fully developed, which is probably why every single fall she got influenza, and often that more serious thing, pneumonia. And a couple of times she'd be hospitalized, but she'd make it out. But she'd been in there for a while, and she just wasn't recovering her ability to breathe. And so knowing her and knowing how she was always the black sheep of the family and never felt quite important enough, I and other members of the congregation went and gathered in her hotel room, and we bought balloons and cake and candles and streamers, and we decked it out as a party. And she was so delighted. And she said, "You guys have made too much of a fuss for me." And we said, "You're too important. There's no such thing as too much of a fuss." And she was delighted. And she knew she was loved. And her biological family was in the room, and they just sort of watched. And they got the gift of seeing that their daughter and sister was so deeply chosen and loved. And then Fran died the next day. My mother taught me to die a free person. Now, my mother, for the last 15 years of her life, was under a legal guardianship. And there was reason for this because she was mentally ill and had deep trauma from sexual and physical violence. And we were crushingly poor. And so there was a lot that contributed to both her amazing resiliency and strength in finding ways out of no ways. But when I was in high school, my mother got sued. And the only way out of that lawsuit and out of that crippling poverty was for there to be a guardianship and to sell our home. And that was necessary, but I would say for the next 15 years, she couldn't make a decision about where she would live or where she would travel to or buy a plane ticket or how much money she would have to spend on clothes or food. She had to perform and beg for those sometimes. And I'll tell you, the thing I learned from this is without self-determination, there is not full dignity. And my mother knew this too. And so for the last year of particular life, her focus was on being free. And the night before she died, she got her papers of emancipation. And I think she was holding out to die free. And so I invite us, whether or not there is something oppressing us that is personal or societal or spiritual, what is the work we each need to do to be free? And the last lesson was, say the goodbye you can. Now, my mother had 4 children, each of which had a very unique relationship with her. And 3 of us accompanied my mother through this dying process. But she asked that we not tell her oldest daughter that she was dying. But after weeks of accompanying her and seeing where it was going, I realized I could not be in right relationship with my sister if I hid from her that our mother was dying. And so I told her that it was happening and where to find her. And my sister went. And I wasn't there that day, but they shared the conversation with me. And it went like this. I love you, but you have never understood me. And you've never embraced me. And you are still my daughter, and I love you. And you're still my only mother, and I love you. Sometimes the goodbye we can say is the only one available to us. Let me tell you the last words I had with my mother. I'd been with her, and I needed to come back and be a minister. And so I was leaving, and she took my hand and she said to me, "Don't go." And I said, "Mom, do you know why it's okay that I go?" And she said, "Why?" And I said, "It's okay that I go because we have been so close for so long. I love you so much, and you are written on the tablet of my heart, and I carry you with me wherever I go, and I have our love with me wherever I go. Mom, am I written on the tablet of your heart? Do you have that love too?" She said, "Yes." And I said, then it is okay, for we are always together, and we are never actually apart. You say the goodbyes that you can, and you do the work in your life to get it to be the best goodbye available. Dear ones, our Unitarian faith tells us that we are part of an indivisible, universal existence that includes the past, the present, and the future. And so when I put my mother's ashes in the ground, I knew that was a return, a homecoming back to the earth from which all life arose. But it's not just material, it's spiritual. I have a colleague, Reverend Kim Wildchesky, and there was a congregant she loved who was dying, an old man. And she was just coming out of parental leave, and she took her young child with her to say goodbye to this man who was dying. And she went and she said to this man, "Here is my young son. He is coming. He just came from the place you were going to. I'm going to put him on your chest so he can tell you, just you, about that place." And the baby took the man's hands in his face and went, "Welcome home." And our Universalist ancestors tell us that there is a love that never lets us go, that is more powerful than anything else. And I will tell you, after my mother's death, there was so much love. In fact, the love I have for her has filled the void of her physical absence. Love is more than death. Death has not diminished it at all. There is absolute, unbroken continuity of love. So, beloveds, let us recognize, though accompanying someone in dying can be full of grief and loss and change, it could be an incredible spiritual gift of love. And in our own death, I want for myself to be like Mary Oliver says in her other poem, "When death comes to me, I want to go into it full of curiosity, wondering what it will be like in the darkness of that cottage. I want to know the beauty of that darkness and if there will be a dawn through its window." May it be so, and amen.